How does the knight move?
Shit. Oh, my rook. What am I doing?
The rook! The bishop! The queen!
Hello and welcome back to episode 7 of the Road to 2000 series. In this episode, we're going to be looking at the endgame and mainly converting winning positions. So, let's see, what do we start with? First, we're going to be looking at the rook roller. The rook roller is a technique where you can use 2 rooks to checkmate a lone king. So, how does the rook roller work? Pretty much what you want to do is you want to cut the king off with one of your rooks. Here, I chose the 6th rank. So, we start by bringing one of our rooks to the 6th rank. It doesn't really matter which one, mostly that you're just cutting the king. So, in this case, I bring my rook to the 6th rank, cutting the king off. Why is this important? Well, now the king can never really escape, so you're already trapping it down to just these rows. Then, after the king runs, you bring your rook over, because our rook is under attack. Our goal now is to bring our rook to the 7th rank to kick the king back. But we can't start with it, otherwise we'll lose our rook, which isn't good. So, we bring our rook out of the way, so that it's not under attack. The king slides, and we want to bring the rook to the 7th, but for now, we're going to bring it over to a3, so that we're prepared, because if we bring it to the 7th, black will again just capture. So, after we bring our rook to the 3rd, we're finally getting what we want. Our rook is at the 7th. The king will go back to the last row, and now we just need a rook on the other side, so we bring our rook over to threaten a checkmate. The king slides. We slide the other rook to the other side, and then we can checkmate. So this is a classic rook roller. Now, you might say, well, how is this a rook roller? It doesn't really look like a roller. But you can see the rolling effect if we decided to cut the king off along this row. Then you can see how the rooks are just rolling the king down and then giving us a nice checkmate. So that's pretty much how to checkmate with 2 rooks. You can apply the same concept with a queen and a rook, because the queen can move like a rook. Just one tip is to not stalemate if you have a queen and a rook, because they're more powerful, and you want to make sure that the king can always move. Okay, now we're going to be looking at how to checkmate with the queen. So, with the queen, it's pretty simple as long as you remember the knight rule. So, let's start. So, basically, the knight rule is where your queen should be a knight step away from the king at all times. So, first, we have to prepare it. Because our queen is in the corner, we should probably bring her towards the center. Generally, don't put your opponent in check. I think it's like a big habit for beginners to do that, because I think checking brings them closer to checkmating, but it's not always the case. Here, I think a move like queen d5 to centralize the queen is more than acceptable. So, once the opponent's king moves, we can now play queen to e6, getting our queen 1 knight jump away. And when the king runs back, you can just imitate them, right? You can bring your queen, so you're still a knight jump away. Now, my recommendation is to do this knight jump method until your queen is cutting the king off on the last rank, in which then you can bring your king in and quickly get a checkmate. Now, the final thing we'll be looking at is checkmating with the rook. So, with 1 rook, you're still able to checkmate, but it's much more difficult than with the queen or with 2 rooks. So, what I'd recommend is first you want to restrict the king off on the last file. So far, we're restricting the king on the 3rd rank, but we can easily increase it to the 4th rank. Then, all we do is follow this systematic approach. Basically, when the opponent's king moves, we want to eventually get our king in a position where we can put them in check and our king would cover these 3 squares. So at first, it would seem quite intuitive to play the move king to e3. However, you generally don't want your kings to be directly opposed. What you want is you want to move your king to d3 here, cutting off most of the squares and just bringing your king closer. The opponent will likely run their king, let's say to d5. Now, the strategy is simply to, normally we would play check because our kings are directly opposed, but we can't. So we move our rook out of the way to threaten the check. Then the king moves back. Now we do not want to check or run with our king. This is because if we check, the king escapes, so we don't really have much. And if we move our king, our opponent's king will move back and we're not making progress. So here we have to waste a move. Because when we play rook to a4, sliding the rook to the other side, we're not threatening to check right away. But if the opponent's king moves back, we could check. And so then they have to run. We run, they run, we run, they run, we run. And because there's a limit to how many squares, eventually they'll be forced back and we can get our nice check in. And we can follow this pattern. We bring our king in, they follow us, they'll chase. Eventually, they'll tap our rook. But when they do this, we simply just run it to the other side, then waste one move. So a typical plan is to, instead of bringing the rook all the way back, is to bring it one square from all the way back, and then to trap the king. Then to continue with our plan. And if we repeat this a few times, eventually we'll win. Because what will happen, as we see again with this pattern, we're not afraid to get our rook attacked, but we have to remember not to move it back. Because if we run it wherever we want, the king will escape. But if we continue to cut it off, we can eventually get this nice waste of move. Because again, here I actually made a slight inaccuracy because they could have ran this way and then we would have had to redo the process a bit. But it's fine. Then it ends up working out the same. Check, king runs, and we continue to do our chase. And eventually, as we can see here, if we waste the move, this was critical. If we just ran the king, we're not making progress. We're going to make a draw probably if we continue like that. So we waste the move, critical, and then eventually we can finally get that sweet, sweet checkmate, which is right here.